Sorry. No problem. My name is Moira Lucardie. I am a third-year anthropology student. My mentor is Nawa Sugiyama from the anthropology department, and this is my project on catharsis and Dionysian iconography and ritual. On this slide, you may see two figures that are actually part of my research. The one on the left is the neck-handled amphora front Dionysus in Selene, and the one on the right is a Dionysus with satyrs. Both of these are two different depictions of merriment within Dionysian ritual, both from the Archaic period or the Dark Ages of Greek history, and the Classical period, the period after the Dark Ages. In most of mythology, Dionysus is seen as the son of Semele and Zeus. However, in other mythologies, specifically those of the mystery cults, he's also seen as the son of Persephone and Zeus. In his mythology, he is described as the god of wine. However, he has had some connections to the underworld, especially within the mystery cult Orpheanism, where he is sort of described as a Zeus of the underworld, similar to Hades. And we also see this especially within the ancient play by Aristophanes, The Frogs, where he goes into the underworld in order to retrieve the playwright Euripides. He has also been described as a deity of ritual madness, and we see this especially within this iconography of wine, libations, and the history of madness within his mythology. This figure you see here is Dionysus himself. He is most often depicted as an adult that is fully clothed who is also fully bearded, holding grapevines. You may be asking why I want to study Dionysus. Well, I want to study him mostly due to the conflicting interpretations that mostly come from just the nature of the past in archaeology and how we often have to sort of negotiate these features of deterioration in order to get even just a glimpse of how it was in the past. I also want to study him due to the historic and contemporary bias we see within the material culture. Historically, mythology has been told through the lens of men's perspective, mostly due to the high presence of male orators having their own agenda when telling mythology. However, I also want to study him due to the contemporary bias, mostly with problems with interpretation due to white supremacy in archaeology, similar to problems we see within Norse mythic tradition. I also specifically want to study Dionysus's prominent mystery cults due to how he has such a strong mythic character within ritual. And from this, a lot of the ritual elements that we see in his mythology, we can even ask like his connection to Greek catharsis. The main question of my research is, how are pottery iconography depicting Dionysus representative of ritual practices of emotional catharsis? And we can even ask, how were these ritual practices used for emotional catharsis? This figure you see here is a depiction of a Dionysian ritual of winemaking with Dionysus that you see in the center as a stand-in. With my methodology, I'll be working within the scope of research of Greek pottery depicting Dionysus or figures closely associated, such as Maenads or woman worshippers of Dionysus, or satyrs who are half men, half goat worshippers of Dionysus, or any other familial connections that he has that we see in mythology. And I'll be studying these material culture from the Archaic period to Classical period Greek. I'll be mostly conducting my methodology through a database that will be depicted on a quantitative and qualitative data based on pottery figures, motifs, artists, and the origin place of the pottery. And from this, I'll be able to research the context based on the estimated origin, the religious environment, and the time frame the artist was active when making this pottery piece. For my research, I expect to see an abundance of iconography depicting madness, mostly due to the relevance of Dionysus as a figure of madness, and also the prominence of madness within his mythology. We may see this especially with the Maenads, who are seen as in this pose of madness, where their arms are often wild and dancing. In connection to madness, I also expect to see an abundance of iconography depicting ritual elements, specifically the elements of disguise, transformation, winemaking, and Dionysus as a stand-in, similar to the previous figure you saw. That is also often a very big part of mythology. It's around Dionysus as well. I also expect, due to his prominence within mystery cults and connection to the underworld, to see an abundance of funerary pottery or pottery depicting Dionysus in the underworld. Finally, I also expect, due to the prominent mystery cults within Athens and Thebes, to see an abundance of pottery from these city-states. Finally, I would like to thank my mentor, Nawa Sugiyama, for her advice and guidance during the progress of my research, and I would especially like to thank the Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellowship in UCR, who had supported and made possible not only my presence in the symposium today, but also the opportunity to do the research.
All right, thank you. As a person who enjoys my wine, I'm very attracted to the research there. So we have our 5 minutes for conversation now for Moira. And again, we can put it in chat, or you can raise your hand, or if it has a quiet moment, you can just speak up. Caitlin?
Why did you decide to utilize pottery as the medium for your research? Why not something like literature or myths or lores, things like that?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that. So from the timeline that I'm with, the Archaic period is often described as the Dark Ages of Greek history. And this is where we see a lot of illiteracy and a lack of literature about Greek mythology, mostly due to how this was more of like the warring times, and a lot of the literature was either destroyed or wasn't created due to sort of illiteracy. And so another thing is pottery is super durable. Like even like the conditions, like from the figures I showed you, like they're still really good due to how well the pottery was made and just how durable pottery is as a material culture.
Versus like what, papyrus or something like that?
Oh yeah, papyrus does horribly with like the elements. Like
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask, and I'm almost afraid to because it reveals my complete ignorance to this complete historical moment. But what are the maybe like big cultural or ideological differences between the Dark Ages and the Classic period? I mean, obviously that could fill a book. I'm not asking for that, but my follow-up question really is like, what do you expect to find in the difference of the depictions based off of the different, characteristics of those, different time periods?
I definitely expect to see sort of like a shifting of like sort of ritual practices with Dionysus, because so far I've sort of seen like different depictions of Dionysus going from the Archaic period to the Classical period, especially. And that sort of shows how people like either how Dionysus becomes more popular as a god, because like it has been speculated that Dionysus was originally like a foreign deity that was sort of adopted, but it's also been speculated that he was like, they already had a Dionysus, but like he was like an older god, and he was just sort of revived with sort of like the fall of the sister culture, the Minoans. But I also expect to sort of see like especially from the classical age, like sort of like a more sophisticated so like more sophistication in a lot of the mythology, especially as the classical period is like very much characterized as sort of like an imperial force, especially in regards to Athens, who was sort of seen as this huge cultural center, as well as this imperial center as well.
The mystery cults, then, if he became more popular throughout the time because either of the strengthening, either he was imported or it was a revamping, a revision of his image and his power. Do the mystery cults themselves become more popular and get more cultural gravity in Greek culture at that time?
Yes, I definitely expect that to see it a lot in Athens as well, because it like um there was a lot of festivals dedicated to Dionysus in Athens, especially, and they also have a prominent cult around wine there as well. That sort of is a foundational myth, and um and it also depends on like how prominent the cultural center is as well. Like I talk a lot about Athens, but I also see a lot of Athenian pottery in the material culture, because um, we also have to talk about sort of there was warring between a lot of like the different polises and city states.
Mhm.
And so a lot of times in order to sort of beat them down was to destroy like a lot of their things. It was like to sort of take away their identity as well. And so um, a lot of it has to do with sort of these power dynamics as well. Um, and with Athens, it's sort of this weird thing, like how it's in like culturally.
I might have one more, but I don't want to monopolize. If anybody else has a question they'd like to ask or a comment that they want to make about the research.
Yeah, I had just a quick one. So I'm trying to think about, I don't know much about, Greek pottery and characters, but would you say that there was a very clear binary in like different representations of Greek culture, like male and female, or is there more fluidity to it than we might consider in today's age?
So it's kind of a little bit of both, because Dionysus himself is a character that is very fluid himself. Like he has been described as a queer character as well, and I absolutely agree with this. And sort of like there's this one specifically source that I like to use where this question on why like in older works, especially, Dionysus is seen as clothed when a lot of like Greek male figures are seen exclusively naked as to like show like masculinity, and yet he is shown like fully clothed, and yet he's also powerful himself. And it's sort of like this has all sort of been seen as like a symbol of asexuality. Um, and so it's definitely interesting. And like I said, disguise is a big part of Dionysian ritual. And you will see in a lot of mythology that Dionysus will take on any form. He'll take on the form of an old man or a woman, because it's sort of like this ritual aspect of liminality where you take off your identity within your society um, in order to be free, and then you put back the mask of your identity in order to like reintegrate.
So like madness, not just as like chaos or anti-sociality or something like that, but just madness as fluidity, as like challenging persistent identity in and of itself.
Yes,
Oh yeah,
exactly.
and Caitlin, you can stop the recording, and I will make sure to remind the next two presenters to do that.
Okay.
Not sure that